Imagine that you're at the airport in a typical big city. More than 200 passengers are waiting to board your flight, which is already running late. The ticket agent, let's call her Desi, announces that the flight is canceled due to mechanical difficulties. She thanks the passengers for their patience and invites them to step forward to make alternative arrangements. Collective anger sweeps through the queue of frustrated passengers whose plans, meetings, vacations, and family reunions have suddenly been altered. Your heart sinks. You've been planning this trip for months and have at least 2 more hours of work in the hotel room tonight to prepare for tomorrow's presentation, and this is the last flight for the day. How do you handle it? Welcome to my podcast on how not to retire, a psychological approach to retiring healthy and wealthy. Episode 27, Emotional Intelligence. Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer. Now, before we continue our story, let's define emotional intelligence, or EI, for context as we solve the airport challenge. Do you remember your high school class valedictorian, or the class brain who always got straight A's? Any idea of how they did in their careers? Perhaps you know about former classmates who hit it big in their careers. They started very successful companies. History is full of brilliant, successful men and women who fail miserably or underachieved in the classroom and whose teachers and guidance counselors relegated them to life on the margins. Despite evidence to the contrary, society continues to equate classroom success and reverence for rules with success in life. Emotional intelligence, and I'll try to refer this to as EI in the next little while here, is a construct that measures one's ability in social or emotional situations. It refers to the ability to recognize, understand, and regulate emotions. EI is a set of social skills that is predictive. It predicts success in the workplace. EI transcends race, gender, and culture, and is highly predictable, and I'll give you another list: leadership, sales management, sales, various verticals such as medicine, military, law enforcement, finances, service, manufacturing, and home life, specifically with couples. In the late 1980s, the term emotional intelligence began appearing in scholarly and general public literature. These non-cognitive intellectual elements, termed EI, continued to gain momentum as a legitimate construct, both as a science and as an individual measuring tool of one's ability to recognize, control, and interpret emotions. The impact of EI on personal competencies, social competencies, ethics, the ability to lead, manage, here goes the list again, marriage, parenting, and success as a student has undergone significant research. 2 major pioneers in this, Peter Salovey and John D. Mayer, coined the term emotional intelligence in 1990. And this is the description they gave. It is a form of social intelligence that involves the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, in other words, to discern, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and action. Salovey and Mayer also initiated a research program to develop valid measures of emotional intelligence and explore its significance. For instance, they found in one study that when a group of people viewed an upsetting film, those who scored high on emotional clarity, so parenthetically the ability to identify and give a name to a mood that is being experienced, recovered more quickly. In another study, individuals who scored well in accurately perceiving others' emotions were better able to respond flexibly to changes in their social environments and build supportive social networks versus those who scored low. In the 1990s, Daniel Goleman became aware of Salovey and Mayer's work, eventually leading to his book Emotional Intelligence, which is my first introduction to it. Goleman was a science writer for the New York Times, specializing in brain and behavior research. He trained as a psychologist at Harvard, working with David McClelland, Now, McClelland was among a growing group of researchers who were becoming concerned with how little traditional tests, cognitive intelligence, for example, IQ, told us about what it takes to be successful in life. So I'm going to say that just a little bit differently. Back then, they realized that the IQ approach to school, to studies, to success, to marriage, to families, everything, really wasn't telling us the story. There had to be something different. Goleman argued that it wasn't IQ, it wasn't a cognitive intelligence that guaranteed business success, but emotional intelligence, EI. He described emotionally intelligent people as those with, and here are 5 characteristics that have proven true, at least in the 20 plus years I've been doing this. 1, they were good at understanding their own emotions. We call that self-awareness. 2, they were good at managing their emotions. We call that self-management or self-regulation. 3, they had the ability to constantly strive for more learning, understanding, and developing greater skills. He calls it self-motivation. I call it lifelong learning. 4, they were empathetic to the emotional drives of others. We call that empathy, and empathy is normally, well, let me just reframe it. Empathy is not anything, has nothing to do with your bias, has nothing to do with you walking a mile in their moccasins, and has nothing to do with you relating. Empathy is about their perspective through their eyes. So just having to say that is very important. And number 5, they were good at handling other people's emotions. We call that interpersonal relationships or emotional intimacy, developing relationships based on mutual trust and respect. Early research by Reuven Bar-On indicated that nearly 30% of leadership success is predicated upon EI. In comparison, only 6% of occupational performance is attributed to IQ, or what is called technical skills. Furthermore, it's estimated that up to 20% of overall success is IQ related, while up to 47% of overall success is EQ based. Now, this is research that was done way back in 2004. Now, I'm going to bring the research up to date. As more has been conducted, the most recent one that I've read about is that EI has increased. Now they're saying that EI accounts for 58% of job performance. And the link between EI and earnings is direct. Every point increase in your EI score, which is called EQ, so EI is emotional intelligence, EQ is called emotional quotient, or what your score is. So every point on these specific EI tests increases your income by $2,000. And that's in 2024 numbers. It was $1,300 clear back in 2008. I've not seen any new research on that since, but I'm pretty confident there has been. Emotional intelligence is primarily taught at the executive level, especially when I got into this. Yet logically, it seems that if entry-level employees, lower-level managers, staff, and line workers, including salespeople, were given training in the skills of emotional intelligence, the executive failure rate and overall incompetence level for middle managers would change for the better. Now, just a quick side note and a bit on the soapbox bandwagon for a second. What if we taught EI to our politicians? Can you imagine our politicians with a little bit of emotional intelligence? But I digress. Okay, EI is rarely taught in families. The education system is incorporating social skills on an ever-increasing level, and they're finding great success. The results are fairly noteworthy. For example, improved grades, decreased absenteeism, decreased truancy, etc., and higher graduation rates. So here are 5 suggestions to increase your emotional intelligence. Number 1, treat your feelings as an awareness, meaning neutral, instead of bad or good. One of the myths we have in today's world is that feelings are real and that feelings are all true. That's just not true. It's exactly the opposite. Feelings are neutral. Pay attention to them, what caused them, and what is your immaculate perception? In other words, what is your bias based upon past experiences? And that's a whole nother show. So treat your feelings as an awareness, what's going on, neutral instead of bad or good. Number 2, observe the ripple effect of your emotions, moods, and words. That's called awareness. So treat your awareness as neutral and observe the impact of your awareness on others and others' moods on you. 3, keep a journal about your emotions and give them a name. In other words, give the emotion a name. Give the behavior a name. Don't label a person. Don't judge a person. Don't label yourself. Don't judge yourself. Give it a name. Oh, that's criticism. Oh, I'm going into my man cave. I'm shutting down. Oh, I'm playing the role of a victim right now, and I'm complaining and I'm whining. That's just giving it a name. Now, notice the neutrality with what it said. It's just a fact. I'm complaining or I'm playing the role of a victim. It's neither good nor bad from the standpoint of the name. It's a clarity of what's happening in the space. And number 5, and we've covered this a lot in the podcast in the past, know yourself. Know your identity. Who are you? Each of the 5 steps is a skill set or a tool in the second half of life experience. They are habits that, if sufficiently practiced, create a principle-based habitat, an environment, if you will, that makes decisions for you. You no longer need to labor over what to do. A principle-based life allows you to focus on what is right, make mistakes, do retakes, and grow and develop deep friendships. Okay, now let's get back to our story at the airport. Now, as a reminder, your flight's just been canceled. You have 2 hours of prep time before tomorrow's presentation. As you queue up in line, the man in front of you, let's call him John, approaches Desi, which is the ticket agent, to make new flight arrangements. John is beside himself with anger, and with a raised voice begins his conversation with Desi, threatening legal action against the airline. Making sure a fair number of fellow passengers hear him, he lets Desi know of his importance, exclaiming, "Do you know who I am?" Outside of the story here, I've always been curious about the lack of awareness of such questions. Just give this some thought. This is a no-win situation for Desi or anybody you ask that to. She's compromised, backed into a corner, and she's the bloody messenger. So John continues his diatribe. "I'm the sales director for Diversified Widgets International." Now, parenthetically, this is a true story. And so because it's a true story, personal and company names have been changed. Continuing, quote, "I've got to close a deal that's been in the hopper for over 6 months. You have no idea how much this will cost me if I miss this flight. And you know what? You're going to pay for this." And he points his finger right at Desi's face and starts shaking it. "You and your damn fool airline. I'll never fly with you again. You're incompetent, and I'm going to report you. And I'll see that you're demoted if it's the last thing I do." And with that final statement, John turned on his heels and he stomped away, muttering further imprecations over his shoulder. Okay, pause. Now let's take an inventory of the situation. As my associate Brian Evans is fond of asking, what are we solving for? John needs to arrive at his destination before tomorrow's important sales call. So we're trying to find a different flight or flights that will get John to his destination by 9 a.m. the following day. It's now 5:30 p.m. the day before the presentation. Desi is the only person on the planet right now who can solve John's problem, and he just slammed her. In my world, this is called collusion, or the incompetent ability of a person to behave in a manner that gets them the exact opposite result they want. John just got the opposite thing he wants. He wants to get to his destination, and he just guaranteed he won't. His lack of social skills, or EI, made it impossible for him to think clearly or act in his own best interests. John wants another flight, right? What John got was a temporary hit of electro-opiates, which is a temporary medication for his self-induced pain, a puffed-up chest, and a lifelong embarrassing memory for about 200 fellow passengers who witnessed his childish behavior. So, do you think this is an isolated case for John? The chances are overwhelming that John habitually lashes out at others when his expectations are unmet. This is a lack of emotional intelligence. Such behavior always catches up with the perpetrator. Sadly, we don't always get to see it when jerks like this have their karma, if you will. So, using a little EI, what do you think? How could John have handled this differently? So let's collectively conduct a little case study, and you're going to pretend that you're the next person in line. What are you going to say? What do you say? So think about that for a second, and I know I'm asking you to think quickly. Either pause it or just continue to listen, because I'm going to throw a couple ideas at you. So we're going to start with a technique called connect and redirect. You approach Desi at the ticket counter. Now, it's essential to remain neutral without judgment and then emotionally connect with her and the situation. Now, before I continue, I want you to consider, how can you apply this in everyday life with family, friends, children, parents, spouses, loved ones? This is applicable across the board. It's universal. It's actually used in hostage negotiations to boot. So you can see this is a very powerful technique. Okay, we're going to start with what's called connect and redirect. Look Desi in the eyes and you say, neutrally, it must be hard to deal with people like that. Are you doing okay? Since this is a true story now, I'm going to go ahead and pick up from the author's own experiences how the dialogue went. Desi responded, "You have no idea." To which the gentleman said, "Looks like," and this is the gentleman who's now you, and he's the next in line, "looks like the airline has some problems and people think it's your fault." See how he's connecting there? It doesn't make much sense to blame you. I feel bad for what you have to put up with. He is empathetic. He's seeing it through her eyes. Desi, getting her wits about herself, then says, "It comes with the job. Now, how can I help you?" So very good how she redirected that. That was very powerful. In the real story, our protagonist explains the situation, and in less than 3 minutes, he was booked on a flight, leaving 30 minutes later. He had to travel over 1,000 miles in the wrong direction and then connect back to his final destination, but arrived at the hotel by midnight. The following day, our protagonist made his presentation and wrote a letter of accommodation for Desi, praising her for the fantastic customer service. So what's the difference between the two stories? During the experience, one exercised self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and developed mutual trust and respect, or interpersonal relationships. These are 4 of the 5 primary tenets of emotional intelligence. Remember, the 5th tenet was being a lifelong learner. Let's conclude this part of the episode with another case study that I wrote many years ago. This is for couples and sales professionals. This case study focuses on self-awareness as the starting point for leadership, relationships, and personal integration. So here's the setting. Many years ago, as I sat in a corporate training meeting on selling skills, so we're talking late 90s. No, that's not true. That was the early 90s. I pondered the ramifications of implementing these techniques that I was being taught at home with my wife and my children. Now imagine the following scenario playing out if I were to practice my newly learned sales technique of asking for the close a minimum of 3 times while highlighting the benefits of my product. Now keep in mind, it was a sales training class, and I'm making this applicable. If it's universal, if I'm being taught something at work, it should work at home, right? But what I was being taught, I would never practice on my wife. So by way of clarity, this never happened. I just imagined what would happen if I actually did what I was being taught at work with my wife. So hang on a minute. I'm going to go get that lovely bride of mine, and we're going to do this case study together. Hey, Sherry, what time do you want to leave for the Mariner game on Friday night? 3 p.m. to avoid the traffic, or 5 p.m. so we arrive about 30 minutes before the first pitch? Now, parenthetically, I'm assuming the close.
What are you talking about? We're going to my mom's birthday party on Friday.
So the question is her space safe? Me. Now, you know, if we leave at 3 p.m., we can have dinner together on the waterfront, and the boys can get some autographs before the game. So you see, I ignored her objection, and I'm now going to work the benefits. So Sherry, looking at me like I'm a space alien.
Hey, Rich, we planned this party 2 months ago, and Some of your marital privileges are at risk if you continue this nonsense.
No problem. I hear what you're saying, and I know exactly how you feel. So would you like to eat at Ivar's or grab some stadium food? The boys prefer typically the stadium menu, but I know you have a soft spot for clam chowder. You're always in a good mood after a good chowder and a ball game. So does leaving at 3 p.m. work for you, or would you prefer to leave at 5 p.m.? So parenthetically, more ignoring. I really don't have a clue what she's saying or how she feels. I'm just selling the benefits, and I'm making another assumed close. I'm seeking agreement, and I'm not listening at all. So what's your takeaway? Have you ever encountered sales professionals like this? Do you have a family member or a friend who's like this? And are you like this? I've presented this case study to thousands of participants in my workshops and lectures, and the general response is first one of laughter and then incredulity. And they're laughing at the nonsense, the senselessness, and the incredulity of the husband's lack of self-awareness and other selfishness. This is EI 101, or better said, this is what not to do with your spouse in sales as a leader or a parent. And as before, don't try harder to be clueless, selfish, and not self-aware in your space with others. Try different. In other words, pay attention, listen, make it about others, create safe space, be empathetic, and above all, practice, practice, practice.